what are we here for? So we're here for the endurance Q&A. Quick bio. So I'm Darren Reevell. I'm the regional coach and lead for endurance in the north, event group lead for ultra running, level 3 endurance, sprints and hurdles. Did sprints and hurdles not because I intended to be a sprints coach, far from it, just because I wanted to understand the biomechanics of running faster. I've never actually coached a proper sprints and hurdles session outside of the actual classroom base. I'm an England team manager for various things, such as the Anglo-Celtic Plate. I've been English team coach at various events. I was involved with the GB team at the IU 50K last year. Consultant coach, and I've been coaching endurance since 2007, dealing with athletes of all abilities, from those right new right up to those sort of who are looking for age group places, podium finishes, national, international vests, really. So I kind of work with all those. So what are we here for? A bit of a Q&A, really. Share knowledge and experience, ask questions, hopefully take something new that you can use in training, and maybe take some contacts as well. So we'll have some email addresses on here. So that's we go. Yeah. Hello, Maureen from Stockport Harriers. Okay, so let's get into the Q&A. What questions do we have out there? Any questions so far? None at the moment. Any questions? Just give 1 second. If not, I will go into a bit of a speech about some stuff that we can and cannot do in relation to what we're kind of working with now. So, and the format is pretty loose. There's no questions are off the table right now. We just answer any questions as they come up. So feel free to ask any questions, and Tom will bring them up. Okay, so who have I coached? Great question. So James Stephen has asked a question, who have I coached? I'm currently coaching a couple of guys who are looking sort of for ultra running. So chap over in Hull, who is looking to try and break the course record over at the race across Scotland at the moment. Quite a few age groupers that are sort of in the realms of 240 marathoner paces, as well as been involved with quite a few of those in the kind of age group categories. So a lot around that, but I'd rather not name them unless they want me to name them. You can look on my Power of 10. You will see some of the athletes who want to be named will be named on there. Others maybe want to keep themselves quiet as being coached and stuff, so they don't necessarily come in that. But yeah, again, like I said, there's a wide realms of experience in there. So any other questions we've got there, really? Let's have a look. So there's a question here from Kelvin, if we could bring that one up. That are there any training sessions that you can do in an hour that give similar effect to that of a much longer run? So yes and no, it depends upon what we're looking for. So when you say a longer run, are we talking about sort of that long, slow distance, you know, where we're referring to somebody getting that big, long aerobic base? Well, of course, you can't really do that in less than an hour, because what you're trying to do there is you're trying to improve that aerobic economy, so build that mitochondria. That tends to happen when athletes sort of get beyond an hour. We start seeing that development. So it's very difficult to get that kind of improvements in your running in less than an hour. However, you will make some running economy improvements, and you will build a little bit, but not as much. Of course, you can do lots of sort of more sort of strength-based workouts in there. So you might look for, say, a more challenging route to perhaps run along. So that can give you some additional stimulus in there, sort of things like that. But it's difficult to actually really answer that question unless I know exactly what we're talking about here. But I'm assuming you're talking about the realms of a long run. So you're going out there, say, for a 2-hour marathon training run or a half marathon training run. Can you replicate that in an hour? Well, probably not. But of course, what you can do is you could add some cumulative fatigue into your legs. So you could do sequential days of longer runs of around about an hour. So when you get to that second, third or fourth day, you will have some fatigue in there. You could look to maybe do if you've got access to a spinning bike at home, or you could look to maybe do a bit of a spin beforehand and then go straight out and do your run there afterwards, really. Any more questions? What's the next question we've got then? Okay. Yeah, you know, actually one of my favorite books is it's called The Little Black Book by Coach Hudson. It's a really great book. It's one that not many people have use, but for me it's a really good one because you've got some very clear explanations of not only what the sessions are and how to execute them, but really what the benefits are. So it's one that I would definitely recommend, Michael. It's the Little Black Book from Coach Hudson. So hit that on Google. I think it comes from the States. I think it costs around about $50 or something like that with shipping, so it's relatively expensive, but it's actually a real gold mine. And actually I did lose mine once when I was traveling between towns. I think I left it in a hotel room somewhere and just never found it again afterwards, and I actually had to order a second one because it was so good I didn't want to leave it. So next question. What have we got? So what would be a typical session that you would give for a 10K? Great question. So Patricia, it depends on the athlete. So what the athlete's wants and needs, so some athletes, for argument's sake, they're already going to have a great set of lungs on them, so they're really aerobically developed, and maybe they've got a reasonable amount of speed as well. So for those guys and girls out there, that would be different, say, to the requirements of somebody who's quite new to running a 10K and is looking just to get round. But for the arguments of this particular debate here, what we'll talk about is we'll talk about the two, really, those kind of newer runners, and then maybe those a bit more experienced that are looking for a PB and a sharper end. So for the newer ones, I might sort of start bringing in some simple kind of fartlek based sessions where we're introducing the actual 10K speed, and we might do that over a period of weeks to get them used to that speed. And as they get more and more used to that, then we might make it a little bit more structured in realms of maybe having sort of, say, 3 minutes at their desired 10K race pace, off a couple of minutes recovery, and maybe do that 5 or 6 times in a particular session. And then as they become more comfortable with that race pace, you then start gradually reducing that recovery a little bit so they get used to that. So that's what I'd probably do with a novice one. But again, you've got to bear in mind that for the novice, they're probably really going to want to have that good solid base first, and that's going to be their primary focus. Now for somebody that's more advanced, again, we talk about going at goal pace, and we might do something like 3 times 4 times 400 for argument's sake, or I might go something in the realms of some longer sort of 1K efforts, even sort of something in the realms of maybe 2 times 4 times 4K if they're sorry, 2 times 4 times 1K, not 4K, if they're a very experienced 10Ker. And again, it's all about reducing that recovery slowly but surely as they get more specific nearer to the time, and they're more able to handle that kind of target race pace, really. Next question. What is a good half marathon for a 15-year-old at national level? For me, I think really when we're talking about having 15-year-olds running half marathons, I'm not overly comfortable with them doing that. I do understand that some runners out there and some coaches out there will actively encourage that. For me, I think 15-year-old is really probably a little bit too soon for any athlete to be event specific, and certainly towards sort of half marathon. Ideally, I'd be looking for them to be running shorter distances, probably in the realms of not even quite maybe 5Ks, looking at shorter distances certainly. I think 15 years old is certainly quite a challenge for a half marathon, and also I guess it depends on the athlete themselves and what their chronological or biological development's like. So that's the next question then. So from Anthony, how can I encourage an athlete to put in as much effort as they do for races? I think this was something that I think if you saw the previous presentation from Tom, he kind of scratched the surface on this. I think a lot of the motivation has to come intrinsically. So it's very difficult for us as coaches or fellow runners to actually, I guess, make somebody push themselves to extra effort if they're not really buying into it intrinsically. So what we have to do for those athletes is find out what their real motivation is for doing the actual session or the races. So I guess for a lot of them doing the races, they've got that. It's a definitive, like, clock, I need to hit this. I think when we're talking about with the athletes in training sessions, which I guess is what we're really referring to here, it's probably about getting the athlete into a state where they understand what the requirements of the session are and what the benefits of the session are. So if you can explain that and articulate that to those quite clearly at the start, then I think you will find that the athletes themselves would hopefully find that kind of internal motivation to push themselves that bit harder because they understand what they're trying to achieve. And of course, one of the big things we see often when working with athletes in training sessions is actually they're pushing themselves maybe even too hard in some cases, and we want them to throttle back a little bit. So we might want them to be running some kind of threshold pace stuff, and actually they're going way too hard. So that's the flip side of that as well. So we have to really articulate the wants and needs of the sessions to make sure that the athletes understand that and can go at that kind of intensity. And again, right now is difficult because of course a lot of athletes now, where we used to go in training groups, right now we're going sort of by ourselves in some little solitary runs. You might go with, maybe if you're lucky enough to have another runner in the house, you may go out with those, but typically you're going to be running on your own right now, and that's going to be a little bit harder as well. But again, it's all about finding that intrinsic motivation for the athletes to get themselves to push themselves and what they're really doing it for, and then also explain to the benefits. Okay, so the next question from Susie. I work with a group of key marathon runners, 3:35 to 4:30 range. What are the most effective speed sessions 12 weeks out to the event? Oh my gosh. Here we go again. It's that favorite answer of all coaches. It depends. That's quite a range in ability as well we're talking about there, though it might not seem like it, that 55 minutes of 65 minutes difference between the two kind of ranges there. But when we're talking about that, really what are we saying here is that the kind of session that a 4:30 marathon will be doing 12 weeks out compared to a 3:35 marathon would be considerably different. What I tend to have to do for a lot of the marathons that I work with is we'll work on some sort of fartlek based kind of sessions where we might start something in the realms of 2 or 3 sets of 2K on, 1K float, and as they become more competent with that, then we might increase that to another set, and if they get more competent, then we might go to something like the 3K on 1K float. Those kind of sessions I find are really effective, certainly for marathon training. When we're talking about the on and the float, so the 2K on could be 2K at marathon pace, and the 1K float would be 1K easy. As they get fitter and able to cope with that, I might flip that round and have a little bit where we're going actually 2K at faster than marathon pace and 1K at marathon pace as well. So they're different kind of sessions you can do, but I find a lot of that's going to depend on your athletes themselves, because some of those athletes would not cope with that. If you're a 4:30 marathoner, you're probably better off working more in that kind of upper end aerobic, lower end kind of longer sort of threshold based runs, whereas if you're a 3:35er, you might be looking for more of those kind of 2K on 1K floats or 3K on 1K float type of sessions. Okay, so what kind of strength-based workout would you recommend for a half marathon? God, I'm going to repeat myself here. Again, it depends, and it really depends upon, it should be athlete-centered. So what works for one athlete may not necessarily be correct for the other. I think one of the things that we often see, certainly in running clubs that I go to, is that there is I wouldn't say a reluctance, but a lack of opportunity for the athletes to maybe do their strength training because they've got limited training budget. So in terms of they can maybe train 5 or 6 times a week, and they're going to spend that 5 or 6 times a week actually running, and they don't want to do any kind of strength training. In those athletes, it's really going back to the basics. So you're going to start with the simple balancing stuff to make sure that they're actually stable on one foot. So if we look, just one second, I'm just going to grab a video in here actually that covers a little bit on some kind of strength stuff that we could be using. So bear with me a second, Andy, while I try this tech. I've never tried this one here, so this could be a disaster or it could be perfect. So this, as we're talking through here, let me bring it up.
Pipe maintaining that's a lot of impact force, isn't it?
Let's see if I can find the right I'm looking for. So just watch this for 1 second. This could be the kind of ideas we're talking about with athletes that are new to it, but we're just getting the basics right.
The most important factor for me, because you have to see what's happening. You need that awareness. We're going to start with some squats, some simple single leg squats, okay? I'm going to hold the stick just for a little bit of balance, and then as you develop and get better, we won't need the stick, we can go without. But I want you to look at the mirror, have the toe pointing straight at the mirror, make sure that the knee tracks over the middle toe, okay? So not out to the side or into the middle. But before we do the squat, to make sure we engage the glute and get the glute firing up, I want you to hitch your hip up, okay? So lift the other side up as best you can, and then go into the squat. And almost imagine you're sitting on a toilet. So we sit back.
Okay, so I'm not going to stay in that too long. You're going to bring that question back up again, Tom? Tom Spencer, Tom. Yeah, so I'm not going to stay in that too long, but what we're seeing on that particular video clip there was that there you had him working on some of the basics on there, and I think that's the first thing we need to understand with our athletes. Can they do the basics before we start recommending putting loads and loads of load on there? Because if we've got some really bad movement patterns on there, we've got some poor sort of hip engagement, knee alignments and stuff like that, and you start putting on loads of weights onto that, so you know, some good strong sort of bench presses, or not bench presses, some deadlifts and so on and so forth, you're going to find that basically you really do increase the likelihood of the athlete getting injured and or sort of ingraining those bad movement patterns. So we've got to start at the basics really. So I would recommend the first thing for the athletes is to go through a period of assessment where we do some DMS, some dynamic movement screening. So we look at that athlete and we determine what their wants and needs are based upon what we see. So there's a series of great simple tests that we can do around that, you know, where we're looking at those kind of athletes as they go into squat position, what do we see, all of these kind of things, and then we can work on what that strength session needs to be. And like I said, it does really need to be athlete specific. So the answer is, I'm afraid, it depends. So that's the next question, please. Run technique coach is developing new techniques. Can this be changed for older endurance athletes? So Maureen, great question. I'm thinking, if I'm reading this correctly, that you're suggesting that an athlete that maybe has got ingrained running patterns, is running a certain way, and is maybe going to be working with a run technique coach, and that's going to change his or her biomechanics, and can it be changed, and is it a good thing? And I guess the answer to that, again, it depends. And when we talk about this one is, you know, what is the athlete's problems right now? So this is an older athlete, you know, is his or her current biomechanics causing them lots of injuries? Are they having some significant challenge based around that biomechanics? You know, so if you're a 50-year-old athlete, I'll take me for example, I'm a 52-year-old bloke. I've got some very bad movement patterns based around some old football injuries from when I was younger. Now, for me at this stage, would it be worthwhile me investing lots of time in myself, going with a running technique coach and redeveloping that? Potentially not, because I don't suffer with lots of injuries. However, of course, there are benefits to be had by working with that technique coach, which will improve my overall running performance. But I guess it really depends upon what the issues the athlete's seeing. And something we have to understand as well is that when we do change our running techniques, we may need to drop the load in training significantly, because suddenly this athlete, him or her, will be sort of firing off new muscles that maybe haven't been fired before, or certainly firing off the connections maybe in a slightly different way, maybe taking more load on the posterior chain. You might find the calves suddenly becoming extra tight and stuff like that. So we'd need to consider that as well. So when you do work with that, and even older athletes, or well, any athlete really, if you're working with a run technique coach, you're going to have to bear that in mind, that when you do start doing those drills, that you probably are going to be firing off new muscles, and you may increase your likelihood of getting injured if you do not drop your training load and volume significantly during that. Okay, so Michelle, on the mention of spinning back sessions at home, any recommendations of ones that are good for runners? So it really depends what we're looking for. So depends again, eh? So of course you can just do a nice long sort of spin out where you're just working the cardiovascular system. You can work to heart rate. So of course, you know, you can put your heart rate, your chest belt on there, and you can get on there and you can try and get your heart rate up to a certain level. You could actually treat it as a mini interval kind of session, where you might do some time sessions around that. So you might say, right, okay, we're going to spin for 20 minutes just to get the cardiovascular system woken up, and then we're going to do a series of of 1 minute hard, 1 minute easy, that kind of stuff, and do that for 10 or 15 efforts, and then a nice little spin down at the end. That's would probably be something that you could quite easily do right now. And then of course, there is a typical, if you're a triathlete, you'll have heard of the brick sessions. You could do something like that, where you could do a nice, reasonably tempoed spin on your bike for say half an hour or 40 minutes, then jump straight off that and go for a run as well. And that's another thing you could possibly do as well. So next question, Tom. Would you advise, so this is from Paul, would you advise athletes on how may now run at different times of the day at the moment? Would you advise athletes how may now? Okay, so we're talking about, I guess, the times of day they should be running at. I guess it depends on your environment, because of course at the moment we're talking around needs for sort of social distancing and stuff like that. And I'm fortunate, I live rural Yorkshire, so for me it's quite easy. I can jump at any time of the day. I can get down the road and within 10 minutes I'm on a field in a wood somewhere like that and nobody around me. If you live in the city, of course, you might, or a busy town, you might have to kind of bear that in mind when you go out and do your session. So if you are at home, like a lot of us are right now, and you need to do your run, you might want to pick up one of the less busier times, because of course people still are commuting to work, those essential workers that have to go out there, or maybe if they're going to the shop. So try and avoid those areas that are going to be a little bit busier. So I guess it's about what's appropriate for your own individual area. We come back to that, it depends again, aren't we? So if your area is really busy, then you need to kind of work around what those busy times are. And as I said, typically for most people it's going to be still, although it's not as busy as it used to be, peak commuting times, 8, 9, that kind of stuff, and on the way home maybe 4 or 5 o'clock, maybe 6 in the evening now, because people are starting to go out and walking the dogs in the evening earlier, or so of course you don't lighter nights, you can go a bit later. So it's really doing that area depending upon where you're on. So where I am, I can go any time of the day because it's not busy, but yeah, it depends, I guess. How should a junior manage their rest days and recovery sessions? From Tim Patterson. Well, I think this goes not just to juniors as well. I think this is something for everyone. Rest days and recovery sessions, I think for most athletes are underappreciated. This to me is still part of the training week. A recovery session is as critical to me, if not more, as an actual hard session, because of course when we do the hard session we finish that less fit than we did at the start of the session. So the recovery is where the magic happens. So how do you do it for junior? Well, junior athletes these days, of course, like a lot of people, they have lots of distractions, social media, gaming, all of this kind of stuff is a big part of the juniors these days. So it's really, I guess, making sure that that when they are having those recovery rest days or recovery sessions, that they're doing them at the appropriate intensity. So the recovery run needs to be done at the right intensity, not too hard. And that's often a big challenge for juniors and for seniors, to be fair. Or making sure that when they do have those rest days, that they also take care of the body and have a mental sort of turn off from the actual training itself, and allow themselves to connect with their friends and their family, and not be just focused on training all the time. So really, I guess it's just making sure you explain clearly the benefits of the rest and what the appropriate guidelines are for those athletes around their recovery sessions. This is what it should look like. Pace wise, I'm expecting to be around here, or effort wise, I'm expecting to feel like this, and then I guess it depends on the athletes and how they approach it themselves as well. So next question. So one from Paul Dalton. Hiya, Paul. Good to see you again. I've read and heard different thoughts on how easy an athlete's easy run should be, range from 90 seconds to 2 minutes to elite athletes using the Kenyan shuffle. Do you have any thoughts? Yeah, I have lots of thoughts. So that's 90 seconds to 2 minutes slower than race pace. So it depends on the race pace, doesn't it, really? I guess the less conditioned the athlete, the closer that recovery run will be, recovery pace will be to their race pace. If we're talking marathoners, for argument's sake, since we're talking Kenyans, we're talking marathoners. So if you're say a 5-hour marathoner, your rest pace or your recovery pace is going to be not too dissimilar to your marathon pace, because you're less conditioned. As you become more and more conditioned, you should start to see that gap between recovery pace and marathon pace change significantly, because the issue you've got around the slower or less conditioned athlete is, of course, if you're a 12-minute miler at the marathon, and there's there are plenty of people who do that and slower out there, and of course if we're talking about going 2 minutes slower, well, that athlete's pretty much going to be walking for their session. Now there's no problem with walking in the session, but the athlete's probably not going to appreciate it, so they might be closer to their race pace. Whereas if you're a 3-hour marathoner, so maybe you're doing a 6:54 pace on your particular race, then you might find that actually running sort of 8-9 minute miles is appropriate for that. I guess really it should feel truly easy, and that's the biggest thing. And as Tom's alluded to in the previous discussion, having that rate of perceived exertion or effort, and having the athletes understand that, really helps with them to cope with the actual individual pace. Because saying to somebody, I want you to run at 9 minute miles for your recovery run, may not be appropriate if on that particular day he or she is overly stressed. They might need to run slower, so it needs to be having that based on their rate of perceived effort, so they need to have it feeling truly easy. So we're saying to somebody, it should feel no harder than a level 2, something like that. Hope that kind of makes sense, Paul. Okay, next question, one from Sean. Okay, how many speed sessions would you recommend a week for a 5 to 6 day runner? Would 3 be too many, or stick with 2? Well, yeah, I mean, if you're talking somebody who runs 5 times a week and they're giving them 3 speed sessions, that's a lot of speed in that week, isn't it? Most of their week is taken up with speed sessions. That's quite a lot. I would probably say that 2, certainly for the 5 to 6 day runner, for the most runners, is appropriate. However, and there's always a however on these, again, it depends on the athlete. So for some athletes, having 2 speed sessions in a week might be too much. An older athlete maybe that's going to recover, if their recovery profile means that actually 2 speed sessions or hard sessions during that week take too much out of them, then they might go down to 1. Conversely, you might have another athlete who's got a great recovery profile and they can run 6 times a week, and they could have half of those at speed sessions, hard work, and that would work for those. So I guess it really depends on the individual athletes, but certainly I'd be a little bit reluctant for somebody to be doing 3 speed sessions a week on a regular basis when they're running 5 or 6 times a week. I think possibly you might do a little specific block, or you might do that as you're sharpening, and maybe reduce the volume a little bit of those speed sessions, but go really fast and really short. Then maybe you could do as you're getting specific towards race day. Okay, one from Maureen. I have up to 30 athletes who attend my sessions. I find it difficult to address all their needs. I do split them into various groups to their capabilities. Do you think this is too many? I have run helpers too. How many do you think should be in a group at one time? Great question. And I'm going to say that word depends again, but it really does depend on this, on how well your leaders can work with those groups. So if you've got 30 athletes there, and for argument's sake, we're going to split them into groups of 10. So we're going to have 10 that are going to work in this group, 10 in another, 10 in another. That would be sufficient as long as your leaders have the ability to actually deliver the sessions that you want to deliver those. I think the key thing is, I would say, I mean, I've done club run sessions where I've had in excess of 50 or 60 athletes in one session, and we tend to work to time-based efforts as opposed to distance-based efforts on that. And how I do that, or why I do that, is because I'm a huge fan in a group setting of having shared suffering and recovery. So that means that every time you're pushing hard, it doesn't matter if you're pushing that pace at 4 30-minute miling or 10 30-minute miling, you're still working as hard as the rest of the group. And of course, it gets difficult to manage if it's on a street environment, but if you can get them on a big car park somewhere, then that works really well. So again, it depends, but you can do it. Question from Michael. I've just completed the event coach course, but I'm struggling with my coach philosophy. What is yours? That's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question. So my philosophy, and I'm not sure if it's a philosophy, but my mindset is that I always work based from being truly athlete-centric. Now, what does athlete-centric mean? Okay, so we're not going to answer more questions now. Because basically we've overrun the time, but what we are going to do is I'm going to signpost you to a couple of things of what next here. So there are lots of free webinars available from England Athletics right now. We do have future regional coaching leads Q&A webinars. So we've got one on the 8th with Mark Brace, Tom on the 15th, myself on the 15th again, and Tom on the 22nd of April. And there is more being added on a daily basis. So it's worthwhile checking those out, and it'd be great to see you back online on those. Again, we do recommend that you visit the England Athletics website. There's some great resources there in the coaching environment at the moment. And again, Athletics Hub, they've put some fantastic content on there right now. So if you go into there, you can see lots of great videos that coaches have put up there now that's to enable you to sort of analyze and look at various things and various presentations that have been done. So I hope you found it useful. I do apologize that we did have that technical crash there. It is kind of frustrating when that happens, particularly when we're in the middle of that, and there was some great questions on there. And for those people that I didn't get the answer to, I do apologize. Come on to the next Q&As. There's Mark, as I said, next week, and then Tom and myself a few days afterwards. So get onto those and we will endeavor to answer your questions. My email address is on there, dreevell@englandathletics.org. Feel free to reach out to me, ping me your questions, and I'll more than happily signpost to you or answer any questions your way. But yeah, again, thanks for your time tonight, and I hope you found the session useful, and hope to see you on future sessions. Bye. Cheers.